Join me now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, Michael Kaskey-Blomain, our 97.3 ESPN.com Sixers insider. Follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB. Mike, before we get to the details specifically about this trade, I do want to mention about Elton Brand. I mentioned this on Twitter. I want to say it again here, and that is, to me, Elton has shown himself that this is a man of action. This is not a guy who's indifferent. He's not complacent. This is a guy who, look, it's like Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly, carry a big stick. Elton is not messing around. He is saying, look, if there's something that needs to be fixed on this team, if we got to make this team better, I'm going to do it. He's not holding back at all.
You're absolutely right, Josh. Man of action is a good way to put it. In a lot of ways, Elton has been what Brian Colangelo was advertised to be for the Sixers when he, was obviously brought in for that GM job. The guy that was supposed to take the core pieces that the team had and all the extraneous assets and, combine that and put it together to, a championship level contending team. Brian obviously largely did not do that. And Elton, in the short time that he's been in position to be the GM, has stepped up and made, two of the bigger trades that the franchise has seen in, obviously at least recent history. And, whether or not, regardless of what happens in terms of these trades, like you said, you do have to at least give him credit for being unafraid to, shake things up and to go all in and to at least try to make this team better.
When you look at the fact that Elton is a guy that came in, didn't have a lot of quote-unquote experience at the job, I think that he's made up for that in the fact that one of the things he did in his deal was he got Tobias Harris and Boban Marjanovic, which is a big deal because most people who follow the Sixers may not know this, but Harris and Boban are like BFFs. They hang out all the time together in the offseason, during the season. So the Sixers are not just acquiring a guy who's basically an all-star caliber scorer with a great three-point shooter in Harris and a backup center who can play 12 to 18 minutes a night in Boban and be a contributor, but you're also keeping guys together who have good chemistry and good relationships. And to me, Mike, that shows how Elton, as a former player, he understands the importance of chemistry and guys getting along, being together.
Yeah, that's a great point, Josh. And obviously, Tobias and Boban have been basically tied at the hip throughout, their time together in LA. And bringing them together certainly, I'm sure, makes the trade more, palatable for both of them in the fact that they're, now going across country to a brand new franchise. But at least, like you said, they have each other. And also, not even that aspect, but every aspect of the pieces coming back fit the Sixers in the short term as well. I mean, obviously, this was the Tobias Harris trade, and it's being billed as such. But Boban is a serviceable backup center that'll be able to give the Sixers, nothing crazy, but we're talking 14, 16, 12 minutes a night behind Joel where he can legitimately protect the rim, get rebounds. He's obviously not the most mobile guy, but he's a serviceable backup big. And the same could be said for Mike Scott at the power forward spot. He's a guy that can space the floor. Not a great rebounder, but has some size, some athleticism, could eat up some minutes at that 4 spot. So Elton, not only got an all-star caliber player to slide directly into the starting power forward spot in Tobias, but he also got, 2 other guys that in the short term for this team, they're not throwaways and should actually have, roles on this team, going forward into the postseason.
Let's talk about Harris. For those who may or may not know about him, he's only 26 years old. He's still just entering the prime of his career. He's having the best year of his life right now. He's shooting 43% from 3. This is a guy who can guard multiple positions. I think that this is a guy that when Elton was watching that game last night, he was looking around and saying, one of the things this team needs is when J.J. Redick is out because he's got a nauseous stomach, and he looked pale as a ghost last night. You have a guy in Embiid who's given every ounce of energy he can, but it's still not enough. Jimmy Butler has a poor shooting night. Ben Simmons goes out there, has to get away from being the playmaker that he is and try to be a scorer. If you had Tobias Harris last night, there's a possibility the Sixers would have won that game.
Absolutely, Josh. I was actually talking about this with Mike Gill yesterday on the Sports Bash. Most of the Sixers' losses this season, I don't know the exact number, but very high percentage of them have come when the team has been down, at least one starter. Last night they were obviously down 2. Wilson's out, and they learned, not long before tip-off that JJ was going to be out. And, that puts Brett in a situation where the bench is already thin. then he has to go pluck two guys out of the rotation, put them into the starting lineup, and bump everybody up. And, you have dudes just, playing above their, punching above their weight, playing more minutes than they should, being put in roles that are, quite frankly, just too much for their skill level. And if you have a guy, like you said, if you had a guy like Tobias, adding him will allow the Sixers to keep basically two all-star caliber players on the floor at all times, which is something that they haven't been able to do. You've had Brett has been pairing Jimmy with Joel recently, which has left Ben to, kind of run with the reserves a lot of times. And now you can put Tobias in that group, and you have two guys that are capable of making plays, putting the ball in the basket at all times. And there's not a lot of other teams, obviously outside of the Golden State Warriors, that could really say that they could have two, borderline all-star players at the floor at all times. There's obviously still some questions about the depth moving forward, but just the fact that a guy like Tobias is a fourth guy that can really create for himself and make things happen on the floor should work, to address some of those depth issues, especially come the playoffs when rotations shrink and you're relying on your top guys even more.
Tell the audience out there something about Tobias Harris that they may or may not know about him, aside from, obviously people can look up stats about the guy, but what's something about his game that you think is just a perfect fit for this team?
He's just a perfect fit for, a guy that could play in alongside Joel. He can bang inside a little bit. He doesn't mind mixing it up and the glass, but he can also spread the floor. I'll remember, I think it was the 2014 season, but when he was a member of the Orlando Magic, during those process Sixer years, he had a game winner in Philadelphia when the Sixers were up by, 2 with like a couple seconds left. He knocked down the 3 at the buzzer to win the game for Orlando. He's kind of like a toolbox player. Like there's a lot of things that he brings to the floor. And if you're looking at him, he's basically the best player on the Clippers this season. If you're looking at him as your best player, you might have some reservations. But if you're bringing him in to complement guys like Joel, Ben, and Jimmy, he can really do pretty much everything that Brett would want to ask of him in terms of space in the floor. He can run in transition. I think he's an underrated defender, which is something that I don't think, a lot of people that don't watch a ton of Clippers games might know. He's not a lockdown, but he's pretty versatile. He could switch off onto a 3 from the 4 spot. Depending on the matchup, he could even switch on to a 5 in certain situations. He can guard the pick and roll decently. So, he's really kind of like a Swiss Army knife that I think Brett has at his disposal now that will allow him to get, creative both in terms of the lineups and also in terms of some of the plays and things that he draws up for the guys out on the floor.
Let's also address something that I think people maybe – I don't want to say people are wrong directly, but maybe they're misinformed about is the word I'll use. So this is something that Bobby Marks of ESPN addressed this morning on SportsCenter and other people who cover the NBA have, which is now that Tobias Harris, the Sixers own his rights, they can keep both Butler and Harris. Yeah, they go into the luxury tax, but financially they can give them both their big contracts and keep both of them because they own both of their rights.
Yeah, financially, it would cost. They would certainly be into that luxury tax. But Joel is obviously already locked up. Ben will be, assuming he accepts the rookie scale max, which is, he certainly will. They can pay a full max for Tobias and for Jimmy, and work that in under the luxury tax. It would obviously be expensive, and the money that they would have then left over to fill out the rest of the roster would certainly be limited. But from what I've been able to glean, late last night and so far this morning, to go along with the national reports, is the Sixers do have every intention of trying to bring, both Tobias and Jimmy back long term. This was not viewed necessarily as just like a rental for the Sixers. This move was made, with the long-term team in mind. Now, with that being said, it's sort of it gives them a little bit of flexibility. There's obviously rumors going around that Jimmy could potentially look to sign elsewhere this summer. If that were to happen, now having a third all-star caliber player like Tobias, potentially locked up, and then extra cap space gives them a little flexibility. But, overall, the money is there. The Sixers have been pretty smart. That's something, obviously, that started with Sam Hinkie. And outside from a couple bad contracts like the Jared Bayless one, Brian Colangelo left the financial flexibility of the team, largely open moving forward. He didn't take on any, bad extraneous contracts that would really bog the team down moving forward. And that's been the case, and it's been a benefit now that they're seeing that they have all this space this summer to, lock these guys up and move forward with, technically a big 4 if that's what they're looking to do.
Also, let's point out the fact that, Josh Harris has said previously that when the time came for them to win, that he was committed to this team being a championship contender, and that they were willing to put their money where their mouth is. So it's not like you have an ownership that's trying to pinch pennies. They're just going to spend it on the right players.
Right, exactly. And like you said, that is what Josh has said, over the course of the time. And until he proves different, there's no reason to believe, not take him at his word value right there. Obviously, this team's been building up to, this championship level for quite some time now. And now that they're finally at the precipice of a team that could truly contend, it would be, obviously extremely unfortunate if frugality from ownership was the thing that really held them back. But at this point, there's no reason to believe that's going to be the case. They've all indications from, people I've talked to, and obviously through what Elton has said, he seems to think that, the team will be willing to spend, obviously, based on the moves that he's made. So, financial flexibility is something that was, a core value, I guess, if you want to say, of the quote-unquote process back in the day. And now, it took some time, and obviously some things, there's been no shortage of drama along the way, but now you could say that the Sixers are kind of reaping the benefit of, kind of stockpiling all that cap space and those assets to be able to acquire, the talent that they have on the roster now.
And the key word you said there is talent. The Sixers are acquiring Tobias Harris, Boban Marjanovic, and Mike Scott from the Clippers. Wilson Chandler, Mike Muscala, and Landry Shamet go to L.A. Also, the first-round pick of 2020 and 2021, as well as second-round picks for 21 and 23 for those who may be just tuning in. So the Sixers 2020 first-round pick is lottery protected through 2022. If it doesn't convert, then it'll become 2 second-round picks, and then the 2 second-round picks they sent to the Clippers are both from the Pistons. They're not even the Sixers picks anyway. Then the other first-round pick is the Heat's unprotected pick, which, let's be realistic, Mike, that was always going to be traded at some point. That was one of those assets that we've always talked about, right? One of those pieces that you knew was going to be moved.
Absolutely. That pick, with the timeline that the Sixers are on, that pick wasn't going to be made by the Sixers to draft a rookie in 2021 to complement, which, at that point they hope will already be a championship core. Brett said at the time, like you said, that pick and the whole move to trade, Mikal Bridges to Phoenix in exchange for Zaire Smith and that pick on draft day was specifically made for a move like this in mind. There's people on Twitter that want to nitpick how that pick, who that pick was used on, whether they could have, tried to hold out on it and use it on someone, if you want to say better than Tobias Harris. But exactly like you said, at the end of the day, that pick was never going to be used as a pick by the Sixers. It was going to be used as an asset to acquire veterans. Obviously Brett and Elton feel very comfortable with Tobias being the guy that they use that pick on. And at this point, 2021, 2 years away, it's to me, not that pick's been overvalued. I don't want to say that, but it's just an unknown. So to hold on to an unknown for a situation when you're, ready to contend now, it just seems, it seems like it was the right time to make that move. If it wasn't moved now, like you said, Josh, it was probably going to be moved, this summer or, sometime coming up. They saw the opportunity and they used it, and I personally don't have a problem with it.
Let's address the one void brought to us by this deal. So without Shamet, who was arguably their second best three-point shooter, and another ball handler, secondary ball handler, they're really thin at the guard position now. So does this trade, does it answer one of these two questions? And I pose them to you, Mike. You were at the game last night. You've been covering this team for a couple of years now. So one, does this say that Markelle Fultz is closer to coming back than people think? Or is this a signal that the Sixers have their eyes on a specific person in the buyout market?
I wish I could glean some sort of information about Markelle's status from this trade, but honestly, I would be lying if I told you I could. The Markelle situation, like you said, Josh, I was down there last night. We, and at least personally, I don't want to speak for the entire media, but as far as I know, the media is largely in the dark about Markelle's status right now. We're not allowed to talk to him down there. There's been no official update from the team since he rejoined the team from LA and, was said to be continuing his rehab. You could look at it either way. You could look at it and say, wow, they're really thin on the bench now. They must feel pretty good about the fact that, Markelle and even Zaire are potentially going to step in and be contributors this year and into the playoffs. Or you could take that exact same sentiment and say, oh, they're real thin on the bench. These guys are question marks. They're going all in right now. they're going to look to make a move and trade one of these guys. I truly don't know. I do know that they have some guys on the buyout market that they're interested in. Obviously Wesley Matthews, it's been well reported that the Sixers have reached out to the Knicks about acquiring him. I've been told that they've reached out to the Phoenix Suns about the possibility of acquiring Ryan Anderson if he was to be put on the buyout market. And there's obviously a couple other guys that they could still be interested in through trades, whether it be, Nikola Mirotic in New Orleans or a guy like Dwayne Dedmon in Atlanta, although they probably wouldn't need him now with Boban coming over. They're still obviously going to be active. It's just a matter of, I don't know where the team really values Markelle at this point, whether or not they're going to dangle him over the next, 26 hours to try to get some more depth, or if they view him as a guy that, maybe he'll come in and be an X factor for the team in the playoffs. To me, at least, that's still a question mark moving forward.
The thing with Markelle, though, is that, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but he did show before he took time off to go get his physical therapy on his shoulder that he is more than competent as a backup point guard. And I kind of have to wonder, because he has a good relationship with TJ McConnell, because the team likes him, he likes playing with these guys, that, look, if they turn to Markelle and be like, look, man, we really need you to be a secondary ball handler with TJ coming off the bench. And if Markelle is even half of what he was at Washington, that's an effective weapon off the bench.
Yeah, absolutely, Josh. I do agree with that. That he showed that he can be effective out there, even without necessarily being great from long distance in terms of being able to push the ball in the break, get to the rim, and set things up for other guys. I think that the Sixers obviously have been holding out hope that Markelle can come back and do that. Brett, I can say Brett was asked specifically last night about Markelle's status and what he could potentially bring to the team moving forward. And as a guy that's been to a lot of Brett Brown press conferences over the past 5-6 years, I can say that he, as much as I've seen him, he did not have an answer for that question. He did not look to know really what the team can expect from Markelle. And I think that's kind of the general consensus. But I do agree that if he's, healthy enough that he feels comfortable being out on the floor, that the team could certainly use him, even if he's not back to that Washington, Markelle or the Summer League Markelle that we saw where he was shooting, very comfortably from a long distance, even if he's kind of bringing the type of game that he brought, earlier this season where he was coming in, bringing the ball up, getting out in transition, making plays for other guys. That would be a useful piece for a Sixers team now that's obviously very thin on the bench. So I think the Markelle situation, obviously, over the next 26 hours will be something to keep an eye on. But if he's not moved, by tomorrow, obviously then the question will quickly turn to, when can he come back and exactly how much help can he be to this team.
Follow him on Twitter at @TheRealMikeKB for all your Sixers news, and check out his work over at 97.3 ESPN.com. Mike, appreciate you coming on today on short notice. It's it's this time of year, it's crazy, but we always appreciate your insights here on 97.3 ESPN.
For sure, Josh. Great talking to you as always, man.